Hey all, this is David Sable coming to you again for New York Festivals and Creativity from the Other Side. Today, once again, we're back live, amazing, in Silverstein Studios down at World Trade Center, an amazing place. And you can feel the energy, you can feel people coming back, it's great. And Creativity from the Other Side is where we interview the most incredible creative talent in our industry and elsewhere, and talk to them about what makes them creative, what drives them, what inspires them, what motivates them, and what can they share with us that is going to help us become more creative and, in my view, better people. And today, I'm just so honored and proud to have a new FOD, friend of David, so that's part of the deal, just so you know.
Got it.
Chaucer Barnes, the Chief Marketing Officer of Translation, one of my favorite agencies, an agency I've been following for a really long time, and also a member of our New York in-person executive jury. So we're going to talk about that at the end, but that's so exciting to have an in-person jury. And I don't want to get into talking about Translation yet, except for one thing, that last year, you guys were top small agency, and this year, you're number 3 on the Ad Age A-list.
Number 3.
So congratulations, man.
Thank you so much.
How's it feel?
It feels great. It feels validating. I like to say, our recipe got more popular. We didn't change it. And, as someone with the tenure that I have, literally 10 years that I have, it's terrific to be embraced by the market, your peers, et cetera, and noticed for doing what we've always strived to do at this scale and with these partners.
That's amazing. Well, we're going to talk about that because I'm really interested in all the things you've done. And over 10 years, you've had an incredible impact on the agency and on what they do. But first, I want to talk about you.
Okay.
I want to talk about Chaucer. So one of the things I think is great, first, I love your name.
Thank you.
Chaucer. And and I'm sure you know this, but Chaucer was also a Renaissance man.
Quite.
And Chaucer was a philosopher.
Quite.
Much like you. He was into all kinds of things, much like you. So I'm going to call today's episode Chaucer's Tales.
All right.
Because I want to I really want to get into it. I really want to go. So the first thing, and I'm going to read this because I want to get it right. You're a musician, which I love, and you wrote, "I'm an independent musician in search of the ideal toolkit to segment, mature, and monetize the bass."
Wow, what's that from? Oh, okay. Yep.
You wrote it.
Yeah, I wrote it a long time ago.
So I found it fascinating. So you didn't talk about the music as much as you talked about just looking at technology that existed to help you distribute it. So talk about your music, talk about the distribution, because I think also when you get into UnitedMasters, which is the second piece of Translation, which is the non-record label, record label.
Sure.
Which we'll discuss also what's a non-record label, record label. But start with yourself and then maybe move it into UnitedMasters, because I think people would be really interested to understand.
Yeah, so I was, as you noted, a philosophy major in college, and that doesn't lead you to the door of some, job of any description, right? And I had a band in college. The band was something I attached to, and the music director from the band was a classics major. So he too, it was pre-law. And
so classics and philosophy come together in a band.
Walk into a bar
that in itself is a Chaucer tale, yeah.
So boom, so we get out of school, we don't have anything to do, and we just want to go far from home, and we want to keep playing music. And that's how I wound up in Portland, Oregon, because it was like far from home is the West Coast. LA was LA, San Francisco was too expensive, and we flipped a coin between Seattle and Portland, and landed on Portland. So we go to Portland, and we rebuild the band. Portland's an amazing city for the arts. They're very supportive of people that come to build there. And I got really impressed with the songbook that we put together and the performance we put together and just the whole aesthetic of what we were doing. It was an organic hip hop project. And I loved it, but I knew it wasn't music for the masses. It wasn't like, I wasn't waiting on some big break and I was gonna become whomever. What I was intent to do was, and I think this later got popularized, we didn't have the language for this, find 1,000 true fans, right? 1,000 people who would reliably come to shows, buy merch, buy records from your hand, like not just streaming hadn't really blown yet, but not just access your music, really pay for your music. And for a bunch of different reasons, that's how I found and got into advertising. I was looking for a day job that would be synergistic with those ambitions. And advertising just wound up taking off for me after I felt like I finished what I had come for in music.
What's interesting is I've met a bunch of people who got into advertising because they had a passion, artists, musicians, typically, by the way. People who were trying to figure out, like, okay, how do I get myself out there? And they realized
1,000%.
But let's go back to Portland, because I think it's so interesting. Portland's an interesting place. You're absolutely right, and I've spent a lot of time there. But something pivotal happened to you in Portland. And
so much.
You walk into someone's office who you had no idea who this guy was. You just knew, he's kind of like a Portland guy. Yeah. His name is Dan Wieden. Yeah. And you didn't realize that this is the guy who stood up at Cannes and basically gave the finger to all the holding companies when he was
didn't know what
awarded.
a holdco was.
It was one of the great. I was in the audience that night. It was great. I thought it was like, wow, that's really cool. But you didn't know who he was. And yet he had, and maybe not and yet, maybe because of that, he had an incredible influence on your life and your career. Yeah.
Dan Wieden is my sponsor in this business. He
which, by the way, like, game over. We should just go home now. Just like stop talking.
No, yeah, he was. I was introduced to Dan by another guy that lived in Portland that owned an agency, and I had been doing informational interviews with him because of another guy who was an old school Madison Avenue person who just took an interest in me. So he introduced me to this guy, and in the course of talking to this guy, he goes, "Well, you keep referencing Wieden and Kennedy work when you talk about the things that you admire, so you should just meet Dan Wieden." And to this day, I don't know whether or not that was a fuck off, kid. I don't know if it was that or if it was a true, like, well, let me just put you in position. So
either way, it was a lot of paying it forward.
Yeah, 1,000%. So this guy introduces me to Dan and Mary Norman, Dan's assistant. She says, "Okay, I've got you penciled for 15 minutes with Dan Wieden. Why don't you come on over on this date?" And I come in, like, obviously I know his name is on the building, but I don't know what he's contributed culturally. I don't know any of that. So I open the door, I go in, and Dan comes down, and I'm in the reception area, and I'm well raised enough to know when somebody's trying to brush you off in reception. And he wasn't exactly trying to do that, but he didn't know why I was there. He didn't know if I was there to sell him a vacuum cleaner or what. So he's trying to figure out what this is, and eventually he just walks me up. We get in the elevator, we're walking, and there's like a bird's nest, and I don't know what the business is. I'm like, what is this bird's nest doing there? Is this sofa really made out of polar bear? Oh no, it wasn't. We sit down in his office and we spend an hour and a half together. And eventually I had to go because I had a job and I was on my lunch break. I had to just go. But in that time, we had discovered that, well, he told me, if you can write that, he listened to some music. He was like, if you can write that, you can do this. And he walked me out and he introduced me to Mel Myers. And that was kind of it. 4 or 5 months later, I had met everyone else. And with his hand on my shoulder and his kind of cosign around me, I found a role in the media department. And I started as an assistant media planner, stacking impressions and counting DECs on billboards. And that was my Daniel-son wax on, wax off phase in advertising.
But it is a good place to start.
I mean, it's done well for me. Yeah, it was terrific. And it was also that because my reputation was associated with music in Portland in general, It was like, oh, what's the kid from Copa Crescent doing here in the hallways? People thought of me already as a creative, so then when I took a role in media, I wasn't painted into that corner of, oh, that's the numbers kid, or that's the this, that, the other. I was allowed to be my full self.
And then what was the arc from there that led you to Translation?
I was at Wieden for 6 years or so, and I got good. I got good at media planning. I got strong at digital strategy. I was part of a team that was kind of like an advanced column trying to figure out what we were later going to call programmatic, and won a couple of awards for some stuff. And I just really wanted to be in a creative department. And I'll be honest, I also wanted more money. And I made a move for money, and it wasn't 100% for money, but it was a lot more money. And I moved to Richmond, Virginia, to the Martin Agency, not knowing what the Martin Agency was about, or this was my first, holding company job, whatever. I was recruited by John Norman, who was the CCO there, who had done Write the Future when he was at Wieden, New York. And I just loved that campaign. I was like, that's the kind of work I want to do. That's the guy. He wants to talk to me. I want to talk to him. I went home with an offer in my hands that I picked my young family up and moved to Richmond, Virginia. Now, bear in mind, I'm from Greensboro, North Carolina, and I've got one of my kind of cultural centers is DC. So I'm like, oh, Richmond, Virginia, that's midway
Right there.
between two places I think of as home. It's a 90-minute drive. And that was not a fit. It was not a fit. So I was there 352 days before I found Translation. I wound up very much, success to me and the leadership of the Martin Agency at the time were not the same thing. I think they were excited to be popular, and I was excited to be popular but substantive. And I found myself making work that I didn't care about. I didn't care if it moved the needle. I didn't care if it worked, right? Because it wasn't leaving a fingerprint on culture the way that I had always aspired to as an artist, how I had learned to do so at Wieden and Kennedy. And I was just shrugging about everything that everyone else was clapping about. So I had heard of Steve Stout. I went to go meet him. I was cautious. I was cautious because I'm like, oh, this is a rap mogul who, is dallying.
He's a rap mogul who's got a great rap.
I was just like,
talking to him is great. I know.
And I go to meet him, and it turned out he did something. He ghosted me for the interview, which I was like, oh, see, I knew it. You're not serious about this. And I go around and I'm meeting all the various people that they're hustling to get in front of me. And I meet the strategy lead. And the chief strategy officer is just dazzlingly smart. It's one of those like, oh, it's like, it's too bright. And that's how it started. We started this little bromance on email that lasted a few months. And then he showed me a strategy slide for what would become Budweiser's Made in America, which was this festival that Budweiser and Rock Nation and Translation created together. And the sell sheet read, celebrating through music the people that make America great every day, or something like that. And I think it was America Great. And I just thought it was so brilliant. I mean, anybody can sell a beer company a music moment, but not like that, right? They were dragging on Americana and Budweiser's synonymity with Americana, and they were literally translating that because they knew that the artifacts associated with Americana for the outgoing generation had nothing to do with the artifacts that the incoming generation would appreciate. And because of that, Budweiser had decided that Americana wasn't a youth platform, when in fact, Young America had just put Obama in the White House. I mean, like the level of confidence in the American experiment, the level of hope that was in Young America at the time was palpable, They just didn't have an artifact set to draw it around. There was no reason for them to express that as patriotism.
Right. In fact, if you think about Shepard Farley's famous, poster, it's all about America.
1,000%.
It's like very cool, actually.
Yeah. So I'm looking at that like, oh, you actually know why they should do this. You're not selling them because they're thirsty for music. You're actually showing them how to take these values, and if the Clydesdales on the Super Bowl don't work for this generation, they're not going to write off this entire generation's access to Americana. And not only that, they had sold AB to the French, and there were all these new accents around. If you've ever spent any time there, that company is as important to St. Louis as a ball team is to any other. And there was, inside that building, outside in the world, in youth culture, there was this need for Americana to get re-expressed and re-articulated. And I was just like, oh, that's what I want to do. And that's what I want to do it with. And if they can sell that into the Fortune 500,
you're in.
I'm in. And that's how I got to translation.
So let's talk about culture for a second. Because you've mentioned it a few times, and I mentioned it with Wieden, you mentioned it with translation. Mm-hmm. Didn't mention it with Martin. Mm-hmm. Culture is really interesting, right? So this notion of ad agencies creating culture, not creating culture, leveraging culture. So in the Budweiser case, it's great. I mean, they're understanding what culture actually is and playing it in. Interesting enough, I don't know if you agree, but sadly, I think that the whole Clydesdale thing in the Super Bowl completely missed culture, connection. I have no clue what they were doing, but definitely not what you're just talking about. Without a doubt. It was sad but true, in my view. Mm-hmm. But this notion of culture. So, many years ago, I worked for an agency called Wells Rich Green, and Wells always had the most interesting new business reel that I've ever seen any agency have before or since. Which there wasn't one piece of work on it. All it was people using phrases that they created.
That's brilliant.
In language. And you have to remember, I'm being a lot older than you. This is back in like 1978. And so there was a whole reel of people saying, I can't believe I ate the whole thing.
That's brilliant.
I can't believe I ate all the, you had like everybody from Ronald Reagan to Queen Elizabeth saying, I can't believe I ate the whole thing, or, flick your bick, which was another thing. And became a big deal. And so it was that sort of creating culture. And you talked about viral, so we're going to get into your 5 C's in a little bit. Because I think that's really interesting as well, because I think that is how you help spread culture, but maybe also how you create a little bit. Mm-hmm. But just talk about what are the levers, the cultural levers? You can leverage culture, you can create culture, you can jump on culture, borrow interest culture, which is always the worst.
Yeah. Well, I always like to start with a definition of culture, because when I got to translation, culture was not a crowded room. Everybody wasn't running around talking about culture in the context of advertising, though they would talk about cultural results like that, which is what I love about the idea of somebody being like, oh, you want to know about me? Let me just show you my effect in the world. And since it has, right, everybody's running around talking about culture. So our definition of culture is the networks that we belong to, and then the artifacts, rituals, and languages that reinforce the bonds of those networks. Now, obviously there are underlying beliefs that power how we adopt or whether we adopt language, artifacts, and rituals and all that. And that's part of a broader, I would say like more anthropological take on culture. But for our purposes, groups we belong to, networks, and then these 3 things. You can do this one of 2 ways that we're focused on. One is you can take networks and build new networks around new rituals or artifacts or languages, right? That is a good example of that would be probably Budweiser Made in America, right? Here's 90,000 kids who didn't know each other, who now show up at the same place at the same time, dressed the same way. They're wearing red, white, and blue when they arrive at the thing, and they're having these communal moments around this can of beer that is effectively part of the outfit, right? The beer is the accessory to, this is what I'm here to celebrate, right? Or you can put new artifacts and languages and rituals into existing networks, right? And that's what you see, especially so much in hip hop. You've got a couple of credible authors in hip hop that can make something cold or hot or make you forget it or whatever, what have you. And so, you know, networks, the groups that we belong to, I think the mistake is to assume that they are all built equally. When it turns out that here are a couple of networks I belong to. I'm Southern, I'm Black, I was raised by a legacy of educators, and then here's a few more. I'm a translator. It hurts to say, but I'm a Knicks fan. I'm a lot of these other things.
And now you're a friend of David's.
And now I'm an FOD, right? And as an FOD, there are going to be certain, relationships I have access to, or there are going to be certain memories that I will be licensed to contribute to, or whatever it is. But the fact is, the networks that we're not born to, the ones that we choose, that we opt into, those have a tendency to take a louder role in our social identity than the ones we're just born to, right? And so the segmentation, you talked about segment before, like the segmentation that most people have is like, especially in advertising, like, how do we talk to Black youth? Because they don't appreciate that Black youth is really, really diverse, and that in fact, the things that they are participating in and the networks that they belong to that are above and beyond their Blackness are actually the means by which they're going to be really responsive, right? And this is how you get to a place where whole industries get surprised by cultural realities that if you were sitting there watching it, seem obvious to you. This is how the entire music industry is like, well, there can never be a white rapper because that doesn't work. And then you get Eminem. Never. Or this is how the entire music industry goes, well, you can't sell music without radio support. So like this, Tupac's not gonna sell in Kansas City. Or this is how you get people, missing the fact that, well, I'll hold that one. But
that's interesting. Even when you talk about Tupac, so you see, I always believe you got to go back in history.
Me too.
Because there's nothing new under the sun, right? Everything repeats in different ways and it changes. So when you think about that, you just pinged me on this one. So Tupac, will he sell in Kansas City? Buddy Holly and the Crickets, everybody thought was Black.
Yeah.
And it's crazy that he became as popular as he did, and they didn't realize it was like a bunch of white hicks. It was only secondary into his thing. Mm-hmm. And so he became popular with everybody thinking that it's a Black band, which is really interesting. It's like the same thing with Tupac. Like, of course it's going to sell in Kansas. It's going to sell any place because it's great music.
But here's the thing. You find a white kid in Kansas City with his shirt off and his pants sagging and like a rag in his pocket or whatever, and you think he's acting, right? You look at that kid and your eyes are rolling like, look at this. When in fact, he went to church, he studied for that. Like he doesn't believe he's faking. And that's why, and especially once I met Stout and I got deeper into it, I really understood when he was writing The Tanning of America, he's trying to convince the entire industry, look, our entire mediascape has been built to make these distinctions between people instead of these connections between people. And here's the loudest, proudest example of hip hop spread being, there's a kid in a $600,000 household from Greenwich, Connecticut, and there's a kid from a $60,000 household in Compton, California. And everything's designed to tell you how they're different. But the fact is, the kids in that house, they want to listen to the same music, and because of that, they want to wear the same hat, drink the same drink, buy the same jeans, and wear them the same level on their waist.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. So you have just killed the notion of cultural appropriation.
Oh, well, here's the thing. I said he went to church and he studied for it, right? So there's a different, I do want to make a distinction between cultural exchange and cultural appropriation. Appropriation comes when you don't give the appropriate credit to whoever went first, and then also when you hoard the rewards of whoever went
without
first.
a doubt, but that's not the way.
So that can happen still.
No, I'm with you, man, but that's not the way it's put out. See, that's the problem. I agree with you. That's true about anything. I think what you said, it's the networks, and it's being able to spread those networks, right? So it's not cultural appropriation. It's okay for that white kid in the $600,000 house in Connecticut and the kid in Compton to listen to the same music, and he's not faking it out. He's not faking it out. And
Not
there's
only is it
something
okay.
beautiful about the fact
Absolutely.
that they're both listening. And it's always been my view that in the world, all culture is a mashup. Again, if you go back, you're the philosopher, but if you go back and back and back and back in time, all culture is a mashup. There is no, the only people who ever talked about pure culture were the Nazis, and look what happened to them, thank God. So all culture is a mashup. It's I conquered you, you conquered me, we conquered the next guy, and somehow as that happened, all these things started to spread, and we created new experiences and new culture.
Well, yes, but also even when you come down from the game of risk that is world history and politics, culture spreads. Just musical traditions spread the same way, right?
Totally.
And like food traditions spread the same way, and the moment you come down from, again, like the grandeur of all of that, and you get into the everyday, you see the humongous opportunity that our industry misses all the time because they're so busy putting segmentation on people that is convenient for them that has nothing to do with those people's social identity. Right? And that's how you get these ridiculous kind of gaffes and misses that, I think before could have been embarrassing, and now they're just ignored. I think the bulk of what our industry puts out is ignored.
No, I agree. But it's interesting when you talk about music, because I think music is a place where shared experience, even if it's not shared, but the notion of an experience that I had, an experience that you had that was similar, led us to a particular place, and then even devoid of you, devoid of me, we kind of came to some interesting thing, and then we're able to come together, is cool. I was just thinking about blues and jazz, very American, very Southern, very black. Klezmer music, which was very Eastern European Jewish, and came from a tradition of persecution and just like basically persecution. Come to America, and klezmer and jazz and blues crosses in incredible ways.
Imagine that.
Till this day. And it's amazing, right? And then you realize that totally separate traditions, similar reasons, but then you bring it together, and now you create completely new opportunities.
Networks.
Yeah,
and identities
exactly
as a result.
I love it. And I think it's such a great lesson. I hope everybody's listening to this. It's such a great lesson, because this notion of being able to pull the levers for culture, as opposed to thinking that, oh my God, like I got to segment this little group, and if I'm not segmenting,
direct response is the
killer.
The killer. It's the killer. And I'm not even a Luddite about the underlying tech or the ability. There are very real, let's call it, use cases for everything that we've developed to do direct response. And I benefit from it every day. I probably got this sweater because somebody knew all these things about me. But the truth of the matter is, its convenience has cost us the lever of even being able to aspire to in so many cases.
So in translation, you have what's called the audience group?
We used to. So I led the audience group. The audience group came to be when when UnitedMasters was founded, right? And
So tell us a little bit about UnitedMasters, because I think it's really an important piece here.
So UnitedMasters, I would say we saw Chance the Rapper make SNL as an independent musician. And it was at that point that Stout came and got me and the guy that recruited me, John Green, and we started to write the idea for UnitedMasters. And the simple prompt was, if you could remake the music business today, what would it be? We knew that artists deserve to own their work. We knew that they deserved cutting edge, kind of state of the art means by which to build and then monetize their audiences. And we also knew that they needed more ways to market than Billie Holiday and DMX had, right? And all of those grew out of some problems that we thought were evident in the music industry, right? It was this history of predation that outsizedly affected most people, it kept the industry really, really small. So we were watching, the entire creative renaissance in video and all these new video creators who at the time Vine was hot, right? Like these Vine creators and all these other people. And now the idea of 5 years before that, if your kid told you they wanted to be a TikTok star or whatever, there was no such thing as that. And all of a sudden you were seeing this really robust industry. People were launching podcasts and this and that and the other, and it was clearly becoming an industry. And that wasn't gonna happen in music if somebody didn't go, okay, you're gonna own the underlying IP and all these other things. And so with those three principles in mind, we started off, well, how do we build a toolkit for people to stay independent for their entire careers? In other words, how do you make 1,000 chance to rappers? We go off, we raise some capital for that. And the first technology that we build was really meant to sniff out the people with the most velocity. Because I think we imagined it as, well, look, we've got this brand agency and we know all these brands, and we know brands are gonna factor meaningfully into powering the ascent of these artists. And what if we
stop you 1 second. We talked about that prior.
Yeah.
This notion of velocity is critical. Like anybody can go find
something that's
like
already
the guy
hot.
who's already fact. You sign him up and say, yeah, we're going to steal you from the other label.
Yeah.
The trick is to find somebody who's on the way up.
That's right. So we started building tech to sniff that out, and the tech was good. Trick was, the culture hadn't shifted to the point where people were really embracing that. So the tech found a bunch of artists that today that are mega popular, and we would go to them and we would explain, hey, look, we're not gonna give you a $3 million check because we're not gonna own the underlying IP. You're not gonna have to mortgage your future, but what we will do is continue your acceleration and keep you indoors, and you make the music and we're gonna do the thing. And people were really excited to hear that until XYZ music exec comes up and tosses him the keys to a Lamborghini, a leased Lamborghini, or whatever, right? And so what we weren't fully accommodating was things hadn't changed to the point where Chance the Rapper was perceived as a normal route, right? He was exceptional, he wasn't normal. And so people who were trying to get into the industry wanted the old rituals, right? They wanted the chaining day, they wanted the signing, they wanted to be able to go home and say, I'm assigned whatever. And now, of course, the cultural definition of success in the music industry is completely tipped in our favor, right? So in the intervening 6 years, independence became the new way to express your agency as an artist and the fact that you weren't getting jerked. But at that time, it wasn't. It was like, yo, you haven't made it yet because you're independent.
Right.
And so when we kept bumping into that, let me back up to, the audience group was designed to be able to string together the two workflows of how do you make artists really, really, really hot, and how do you make brands really, really, really hot. You're trying to combine these two desires to be meaningful to people, right? And once we really shifted UnitedMasters to its current definition of a record label in your pocket, and it became less about how do we take 25 kids and shoot them up with Compound V and make them super duper stars, and instead it became, well, what are the tools that we need for people to be able to move into this industry at scale and create their own success? Then the audience group was less necessary, and I disbanded it.
So audience group segmentation, all interesting. We talked about that a little bit. Like you segment too much. One of the things that interested me, you talked about atomizing.
Yeah.
You talked about atomizing, and I'm going to read my own definition into this. What I found interesting, when you atomize, when you segment, like you're cutting, and it's like, okay, I got the silo, I just segmented, I'm done. Atomizing, I'm sort of like putting these little molecules these little atoms up in the air, and that's when you get all this mixing going on. Am I right? Am I reading you right on that?
You are. I probably talked about atomization in terms of cultural atomization, which is, so many people are so desirous to create the line of copy that's Flick My Bic or whatever. And there will always be a role for that. And there will always be a slot for a Mariah Carey or an Eminem or whatever it is. But the fact is, culture is going to be a lot wider and a lot deeper forever and ever I'm in, right? And while there will be things that are impossible to avoid. That's not the only path to success. And so when we talk about atomization, it's usually in the context of, hey, again, you don't need to be on the side of every single building to be successful as an artist. Hey, as a brand, you don't need to talk to everyone in this market in order to be known. But taking it your way, meaning, putting molecules in the air that then diffuse out. I hadn't gotten there. But yeah, I think it's consistent. Yeah.
So the 5 C's.
Mm-hmm.
So when I grew up in the business, the 5 C's meant something completely. It was actually 4 C's. It was all about.
I thought it was 4 P's.
No, we talked about the 4 C's, but it's okay. That was a cultural thing, and it was about audiences and understanding who people were, etc. But you talk about the 5 C's in terms of how do you create that viralness, if you will.
Yeah.
Which I always hate that word, but the notion of being able to be more culturally relevant, so there's more pickup for what you do.
Yeah. So the 5 C's were about recognizing the conditions that were actually necessary for viral success in the amateur epidemiological sense of that, right? And so you got the virus itself, right? That's the thing that needs to spread.
Right.
And then you've got carriers, right? And you've got strand mutation.
Right.
And then you've got some artificial kind of accelerants to packed airplanes or crowded halls. And then you've got some environmental concerns that are easy to tell, like herpes,
sounds like
herpes
the last 2
thrives in the
years.
summer, tuberculosis in the winter, right?
It's like the last 2 years we've been living through.
Yeah, 1,000%. And now it's out of vogue. It's just too dark a moment to have to bring back a Contagion Cookbook. But that's what we were trying to do, is just try to educate our clients and our teams on, you have to actually satisfy all 5 of these conditions. It's not just about the perfect viral load. You're sitting around throwing darts at the board thinking it's this combination of words and that's the explosive thing, when in fact it's all these things in concert. And so again, content, credence, customization, co-incentives, and then concurrence became our way to make sure that as we were running down the checklist of, is this gonna be successful, we were satisfying all of those conditions.
So let's just talk about advertising for a minute. I was listening to one of a panel you were on, and somebody on the panel said, well, everybody knows people hate advertising. And which I've always found to be kind of weird, if you're in the business, why would you say that? Because, well, I don't actually do advertising, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I work for an ad agency, but I don't actually do advertising.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a little tricky for me.
Yeah.
But when I started looking back at some of the work that you put out, and I think is really amazing, but one piece now I see in a completely new light because of our discussion, You Love Me,
Mm-hmm.
which talked to me the first time I saw it, when I saw it before I knew you, and I just knew that it was just a great piece of work out there, and I knew Steve, and I knew it had come from where it had come from, etc. But I find it to be so interesting that it's not a segmented piece of work. It's not meant to be a segmented piece of work, and it talks to everybody. It is amazing. There's something about it that is just so connected.
It does, but it doesn't endeavor to appeal to everyone.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, it is centered in a very specific Black youth context, and it pedestalizes the deep, intricate specifics of the life that's led. And it puts it on display for everyone, it makes it accessible for everyone. And it has this very provocative button in it, which is by the way,
don't.
it's not unexplored. It wasn't like we came up with that concept of loving Black culture, not Black people. That was actually, that was the voice of the people, right?
Yeah, of course.
Distilled into that moment. And it wasn't the first time a brand had even used that combination of words.
No, but our job, talking about do we create culture, do we use it, is not necessarily to create something new. It's to make it accessible, to your point. Great advertising makes everything accessible, in my view. It makes if you're really doing great advertising, and you've got a great story, and you're using culture, you've made it accessible to people. That's what it's all about. It's about accessibility. If it's not accessible, then who the hell are you talking to?
So I'm with you on that, but I think there's a macro deliverable on top of any piece of work, right? And that's really about the question, like, what did you make normal? What gets to be normal because of you love me, for example, right? I'll give you a good example of this. This is from before I came to the company. Stout failed to sign LeBron James for Reebok, right? He was hired to be the guy that brings the draft pick to Reebok. It doesn't work. And I think as a consolation prize, he winds up telling the Reebok guys, hey, you should make a shoe around this rapper. His name is Jay-Z. And they go, that sounds ridiculous. He doesn't run, he doesn't jump, he doesn't shoot. What are you talking about? Matter of fact, look at him. He's not even hot. Like, if we're gonna do a rapper shoe, let's do Nelly. At least he's got a six pack. Steve stays on him. And eventually they make the S. Carter. And the S. Carter goes on, completely blows it, numbers out the water, blah, 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 blah. This is the first signature shoe for a non-athlete anywhere. Look around, right? And if you recognize that Stout, that is a marketing idea, right? The product itself is a marketing idea because he knew that Jay-Z could actually dictate the way that people dress, and because he knew that people were looking for what we would later go and call athleisure wear. It didn't have a name yet.
Right.
But more importantly, so all that is why it was successful, and the campaign was successful, and they did it all the right way, and the guy was like landing in the jet, and then he'd get off and he'd walk the carpet, and he'd be like, this is the S. Carter, and he'd go get back on the jet, and all the optics of that were well done, and it went on to spawn a bunch of collections of sneakers. Saved the company, no doubt. Cool, great. But the S. Carter, the shoe, is actually the midpoint between Run DMC in Madison Square Garden getting $1 million check to wear Adidas, and Kanye West in Madison Square Garden 35 years later unveiling Yeezy Season 3 with the equity of not just being the guy that's promoting the shoe or the guy that inspired the shoe or whatever, but the co-owner of the brand, right? And so this enfranchisement, the story of enfranchisement of these people who create the culture actually being able to participate in a financial reward, that's that Carter plays a meaningful role in that. It's a midpoint.
Right, amazing.
That journey is super important to me, right? And so when it is my turn and I'm doing campaigns like Codes of Culture for AT&T, yes, I wanted to work for AT&T. Yes, I do. But it's much more important that I win the battle with their media agency where they stop doing high composition buys to target multicultural millennials. So let me just run you through that, right? Here's a campaign that's targeted to multicultural millennials in top 5 markets. And so of course they're looking for high composition out of home to buy. So they're like, yeah, buy 225th Street and blah, 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 right? The fight to get the billboard with the non-famous Dominican girl that we happen to know is the right girl that tied her shoelaces just so all the way down to Herald Square is the fight for visibility. David, I need you to hear me all the way on this. It's reverse gentrifying. You understand what I mean by that?
Totally.
You're talking about people who've been pushed out of these spaces. There's a battle on for New York and visibility within New York. And so I know when you put the Dominican girl with her shoes tied just right in Herald Square and Times Square or whatever, that you didn't buy that board because you thought all the Dominican girls were going to buy that board. She's going to bring her entire family there to see her on that board because they're not visible anywhere else. She's going to film that moment. She's going to put that moment out. People are going to congratulate her on being on that board. And so, again, I'm excited for the out of home to be measured not just in DECs, but in social metrics around that moment. But I'm much more interested in what gets to be true after a media buyer learns that lesson, right? That Black and brown people, for example, don't need to be targeted in their own neighborhoods, but that in fact they deserve to be targeted in these, right? So that's the cultural kind of like.
Says Chaucer Barnes.
That's what I'm super into.
Strong morals become the new norm.
Strong morals becoming a new norm is the thing for me. And so, yes, individual pieces, I want those to work, right? Over the course of my career, I want to be associated with new normals like equity in our business, like inclusiveness in the way that we go to market, like those two examples I just gave.
But let me point out one thing. See, because you're successful, see, I would say, if I was buying it, I would have done the same thing. Now, I don't know that I would have thought about, to be honest, I think that the fact that she goes down there and feels, that's beautiful, and I think that's an incredible outcome.
Yeah.
It's an incredibly important outcome. But I think that outcome happens because you understand that segmentation is not siloed, and that in fact, just general people walking by are going to look up and be inspired by that image.
Yeah.
They're going to wonder about it, and it's going to be successful. Because if it wasn't successful, if it failed, you wouldn't have a chance to do it again, and it wouldn't become the new normal. And I think that's what I was trying to get at.
If it fails, we all fail.
Right. So that's what I was trying to get at before, right? We got to make it accessible.
Yeah.
If we make those stories accessible and relevant to everybody, then we have the right to create those moments where that young woman gets there with her whole family. It's like, wow.
And we set the bar right there, right? Because we're all looking at each other's work.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, like, think about what brought us together, right? We're all looking at each other's work, trying to figure out what elements to adopt and what to reject and what's going to be hot and blah, blah, blah. And I want to be in that conversation, and I want people.
You're
to
at the
feel
center of the
licensed.
conversation. Let's be clear. As far as I'm concerned,
and
you're right at the
and
center.
more than anything else, that's why I'm glad to be here. I love the fact that people still have "you love me" as their bar when they're considering,
As they should, because it's great communication. It's great advertising, but its story is accessible. You've made that accessible to everybody. So I just want to talk for a minute about just the whole notion of diversity and something that you said, and there are two pieces to it, right? So we know that there's diversity, equity, inclusion. I always think it should actually be the other way around. It's diversity to me is like, it's bullshit. That's like the price of entry.
Okay.
Inclusion is critical because it's easy to look at a chart and say, hey, look at this, man. I got 50%, I got 30%. My arrow's going up. I've seen it 100 times. Inclusion is different because now you're in the room, you're talking, or at least you're sitting. Equity is really the issue. Right? Do you have equity? So you just talked a little bit about that. Like, now I own half the company, or I own a piece of it. Is it really my work? Am I getting the credit for it? That's the whole cultural thing. So that's one whole side of it. The second side of it is looking, which I think you've kind of answered, which is just looking at work.
Yeah.
And not thinking that diversity in work is being segmented in a way that is almost stereotypical. Not in a bad way. It's not like you're not like KKK stereotyping, but you are kind of stereotyping because you think that. I'll give you an example. There was a big bank that did a campaign in California, and it was the wealth management group, and they wanted to talk to the Hispanic market in LA. And I swear to you, I saw it because somebody called me in to help them get out of it. And the work that the agency brought in was a bunch of lowriders listening to blared out music, and the bank is talking about wealth management.
Okay.
And it's like, guys, do you realize if you put this out, you're going to lose anybody that has any Hispanic background is like going to get out of your bank.
Yeah.
They're not going to go there. And in the end, it's basically like, beautiful Mercedes-Benz, and the family's going to their incredible house in Malibu because that's where they actually lived. And like, hello, like, let's be fair, right? So I think that notion is important. So that's like diversity on that side. But something that you said really struck me. So the industry, we tie ourselves up in knots about, oh my God, we can't find enough young people of color to come into the agency. And we just did a piece, Black Madison Avenue. We had this really incredible discussion run by Walter Gear, and just people talking about like what it was like coming into the business, what it was like coming to the market. And there's like plenty of people want to come in, and they do come in here. The problem is we can't get them to the next level because we don't give them enough people up here to look at and to aspire to and whatever. What you said though was so much more interesting. It's not like we need people to come to our door. We need the industry to come to their door. And that's a completely different take. And I think it's freaking brilliant, and I love it.
Yeah. I mean, the industry came to my door in the form of one of its titans. Here's what I would say to the industry. Those kids don't have a relevance problem. They have an outlet, they have a means by which they can attract an audience, and the most successful of them, you're gonna be trying to buy ads in the content that they make, right? That's just true. You got this whole Web3 thing about to happen that's gonna be a meaningful capital injection for creatives, and specifically creatives of color is gonna give them more of a cash advance than they've ever had in a number of different disciplines. And so, I think our industry would be well served to figure out an incentive structure that brings creators and all of the people around them, the young entrepreneurs that are around those creators, into our business. And it's just not gonna be the old pecking order. You can't expect it to be, hey, come sit still for 90 minutes and take your career off the burner in order to come stack these impressions or practice this thing over here or whatnot. You have to create a new incentive structure.
So we got to go find them.
1,000%. I want all the rappers, for example, because rappers know metaphor, and if you understand metaphor and you start to apply it, you're generally going to win at being a context director, even if you're not a copywriter, right? You get how things that are dissimilar are similar. You're in the business of seeing things that are technically different, but creating a bridge between them, right? And so if I can train that up, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And I don't know how that works. I got to be honest. I don't know how that works in big holdcos that are publicly traded and so on and so forth. But I know all of the heat on the social web and pretty soon the blockchain needs brands and agencies less than ever before, right? They need them for some monetization in some cases, but that's an afterthought. And if you don't have a way to court somebody who's truly culturally successful on their own, shame on you.
Shame on you.
Shame on you.
Shame on us.
Yeah.
So you're going to be in person, New York executive jury.
Judging, high-fiving.
What are you looking for?
I mean, I'm looking for, I have a filter for ideas that I love, and it's, one of them is obviously, this is part of why I love the story that you told, what are the outcomes, right? Beyond whatever the results of the campaign, what are the outcomes, right? What does this leave in its shadow after its media plan is complete? Did it rewire the way that we talk, or the way somebody dresses, or what they use as a badge to symbolize that they're part of this group or that group? I'm also looking for ideas I'm always looking for ideas that, what's the little line they use on NPR's? It's one of the sponsors of NPR. Like, for a more just and verdant and green world. Right. I'm always looking for ideas that check one of those boxes. And I'm looking for things that stop me in my tracks. Those are the kind of ideas I'm looking for, but I'm also just excited to
be in person.
To be with my peers and talking about the work. I think I'm more excited for the activity of it than even the work. Great work I'm gonna see, right? I read trades, I know things, and I live in the world. But the opportunity to get with some multidisciplinary and peers of mine all looking at and gazing at the same thing, I'm super excited about that.
But all I can say is to everybody who's watching that anybody that you vote for, any work that you vote for, like, those people earned it.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm really excited. I think I'm really looking forward to see what comes out of this jury.
Me too.
And the great work. So, Chaucer Barnes, Chaucer Tales, thank you so much. I could go on for the rest of the day.
Yeah, me too. And it sounds like we will, because I'm an FOD now.
Order lunch and dinner and just like sit here the rest of the day. But we will for sure. Lunch and dinner are coming. I just want to thank you. This has been an incredible experience for me.
Thank you, sir.
Just talking to you, getting to know you, having an opportunity to share you with others. I just think all the things you talked about, and what I want people to take away from this, with everything that you've said, to me, that this whole notion of not getting caught in the silos and understanding that there are levers sort of crosses everything that you've said.
Yeah.
And it's different than they're hearing from so many other people, because they're hearing from some that you've got to get back into the segments and you have to be so careful. And I think that what you've said is exactly the opposite. It's this notion of understand that they're levers, understand that they're networks, give people the right credit, give people what they deserve for it. And you're not being a cultural appropriator. What you're being is somebody who's learning and growing and getting better because you've understood all this. And
there's it feels like you're kind of closing this. Yes to all of that. I also wanted to be clear, this idea of investing on the ascent is the way to guard against that, right?
Right.
And popping up next to somebody when they are ubiquitous is an aging and increasingly irrelevant tactic.
It's easy to find chance. It's easy to find whoever. Find the person who's 3 levels down and grow with them.
Find the person that's 3 levels down, and that will be your armor against being accused of appropriating anything, and it will also be your armor against irrelevance, because nobody really thinks Tiger Woods drives a Buick. Nobody really thinks Beyonce drinks a full-throated Pepsi, right? Like that prank is over. And so the question is, how are you going to...
But she does wear Tiffany, though.
Does what? Drink a full-throated Pepsi?
No, she wears Tiffany.
Now that...
that maybe.
That feels a little bit closer. Yeah. That feels a little bit closer. But yeah, this is... Find youth to invest in order to win youth. And that means inside your hallways as much as it means inside your media plan. They're out there. They're not invisible. They're, in fact, more visible than you.
They're out there, and don't wait for them. Don't think like you're putting out a welcome mat. On the contrary, get your cart and your feet and get out there and find them. That's what Chaucer is saying.
That is what Chaucer is saying.
So on behalf of New York Festivals, on behalf of creativity from the other side, again, my honor to have been speaking with Chaucer Barnes, the CMO of Translation. Again, congratulations. Number 3 on the A-list.
Number 3.
Last year, top of the list of small agencies. This year, on top of the A-list. Amazing. And we look forward to more great things from you, from Translation.
We'll deliver.
From your friends. And thank you for all the learning, and see you again.
Cheers.